time to light the match for the burning truth with Casey Hendrickson.
I'm told we're now. We can't report it yet.
The jury
so we're
finds
verifying
him guilty. Count 2. The jury finds Hunter Biden guilty. And on count 3, which is possession of the firearm by a drug user or drug addict, guilty. Hunter Biden has just been found guilty on all 3 of the counts against it.
Yeah, nothing says professional like MSNBC leaving 4 microphones live while one person's trying to do a live update on a breaking guilty verdict. It's okay. We've all been there. Actually, we haven't, because I've never made that mistake. That is that's like a high school radio mistake. So a federal jury did convict Hunter Biden in all 3 federal felony gun charges that he faced. Again, you never know. 1, it's Delaware. 2, you're dealing with the Bidens and the Bidens in Delaware. But also, you just never know how these things are going to go. But it did appear, with how fast the trial was progressing, with it's an overwhelming amount of evidence against him, which has been there for an extended period of time, many, many years now, going back to before there was a candidate, Joe Biden, when there was a former vice president and former senator, Joe Biden. We knew that this had actually happened. So I just want to take just a second before we start moving on into the rest of this and what's next. I think it's important that everybody take a moment and remember all of the times that the news media around this country told you that this never happened and that this was a conspiracy theory. And he was just convicted on all 3 counts. So I just want you to, in the back of your mind, always keep that just right there, close to the surface, just so you understand that the news media, who will defend and run defense for anybody that they like politically, and they will make up charges against anybody they dislike politically. Just keep that in the back of your mind going forward. Just remember all of the years they tried to tell you that this did not happen, that this was a conspiracy theory, that this was just a vicious personal attack on somebody who was an addict. They actually tried to do that, by the way, on Morning Joe. They actually brought people on to say, I was an addict too, and I did bad things when I was an addict, and I should be absolved of those bad things. No, that ain't how it works, especially when you've got old man Biden out there, who's now created the most viral dance trend of the year so far. I know we're only halfway through the year, but the Biden is now a dance. It's all over TikTok and Reels and everything else. It's where everybody pops a squat like Joe Biden did when he hovered over that chair at Normandy. But you need to understand that there are stories out there. You know what's funny about this is there's members of the news media right now who are listening to this, and their backside is puckered up and their eye is twitching because they're hearing me once again tell you about how they failed you, and they're mad that I'm doing that. How about you don't be mad at me? Just be mad at the fact that you didn't do your damn job when you were supposed to do your job. The evidence was always there. It has been there since before candidate Joe Biden even ran for president. You chose to try and gaslight everybody. You chose to try and sweep this under the rug. And you chose to basically tell everybody that this was a non-story. It didn't exist, just like you did with the laptop and everything else. Guess what? The laptop's evidence now. You know what that means? Everything in the laptop is now evidence in future trials that have nothing to do with the gun charges that we're talking about here. This was always the easiest, most simple, and most minor case against Hunter Biden. You even have people out there like Matt Gaetz going, this is kind of lame, actually, to be honest with you. No, it's not. And here's why. If this were anybody else, any of you in this audience, if any of you had walked into a gun store as an addict and had lied on that form, they would have thrown you in a gulag and locked away the key until it was time to come out. That's the truth. If this were Donald Trump, they would have seized every asset that he had. They would have done everything they could to lock him up for maximum amount, and they would use this as an example of why they need gun control and everything else. And that's not what's going to happen to Hunter Biden. So while in spirit, I can kind of appreciate what Matt Gaetz is saying, have huge disagreement with him on this. if we are going to allow the left to weaponize the justice system by fabricating charges against people, which they're doing now, at the very least, you can hold them accountable to laws that they have already broken. Hunter Biden broke these laws. It was well known that he broke these laws, and it's a good thing that he was convicted of it. Now, is he going to get treated like the rest of us would get treated? Absolutely not. If I did this, I would be behind bars. If you did this, you'd be behind bars. And it would be a serious issue. Joe Biden's out there. We'll play some audio from it a little bit later. Joe Biden's out there giving, gun control speeches after his kid was convicted of a weapons crime. And this has been one of the basic arguments that we've been talking about for a number of years. If the left is going to go out there and say, we need stricter gun control, and the other side is going to be like, how about we just enforce the laws that we already have in the books? And when the left says, well, those laws aren't adequate, you go, well, maybe you should start prosecuting your own relatives who break those laws. Because he did. He broke those laws. Now, finally, we have a conviction for that. So this is Daily Caller. A Delaware jury convicted Hunter Biden on 3 felony gun charges on Tuesday. Special counsel David Weiss charged Hunter Biden in September on 3 counts related to his purchase of a Colt Cobra revolver in October of 2018. I do want to remind everybody, because this is getting lost and people are kind of forgetting about this. Let's not forget that the Department of Justice under Joe Biden tried to give Hunter Biden a sweetheart deal where he would not be convicted of this and he wouldn't be convicted of any future allegations for any potential crime that had been discovered or not discovered yet. They tried to give him a blanket immunity deal. You remember that? And luckily, it didn't go through. But don't you ever forget for a second that the Biden Department of Justice tried to sweep this under the rug and provide Hunter Biden with immunity for this while Joe Biden is running around in the middle of, pooping his pants or whatever the heck he does on a regular basis, telling you that we need stricter gun control laws so that people who break gun control laws go to prison for longer periods of time. And he tried to make sure that his kid did not. Let's not forget those basics. So Weiss, again, brought the charges against him after Weiss did his best to help the Biden family out. Luckily, judge wasn't having it. Hunter Biden was indicted on separate tax charges also in December. That's next. Last July, a deal that would have had Hunter Biden plead guilty to 2 misdemeanor tax charges and enter a diversion agreement for a felony gun charge fell apart under questioning of District Judge Mary Ellen Norica, who voiced concerns about the immunity provisions included in the diversion agreement. And look, the judge looked at this and said, okay, never in the history of the American judicial system has there ever been a deal like this. And she specifically asked the Department of Justice about that. And of course, they pointed out, yeah, we've never had a deal like this. That judge could have faced some serious issues with her ability to be a judge, to be able to practice law, if that would have gone through. It would have completely altered the judicial system in this country. And luckily, it fell apart because you had some judge who was sitting there going, I'm not taking the fall for you on this. Absolutely not. The payments, along with former Vice President Joe Biden's involvement in his son's business dealings, have been the subject of investigations by the House Oversight Committee. And again, that is all stuff that is not affiliated with this particular trial here. Prosecutor Leo Wise admitted to Norica, that's Judge Norica, at the time, back with that old plea deal, that he was not aware of a precedent for an agreement not to prosecute crimes that, and I quote, that have nothing to do with the case or the charge being diverted. And it was literally a blanket immunity. It was almost like providing a diplomatic immunity protection to Hunter Biden while Hunter Biden's an American citizen. That previous deal with all of these things that were coming up, it's like, all right, let's give him a couple of misdemeanors and we'll just give him a blanket immunity deal from any crime that he's ever committed, whether we know about it or we've never heard about it or whatever. He'll just have a blanket amnesty and immunity for it. And the judge was like, no way. Now that the laptop, which again is another thing, because remember the gun thing, myth, never happened, fake news, conspiracy theory. The laptop, remember that? Oh, Russian disinformation. It's not real. It's been altered, right? Rudy Giuliani hacked into it and changed everything on there and uploaded his own stuff as if Rudy Giuliani has that kind of knowledge. All of these things that they told you were not real are real, and now you've got 3 felony convictions as a result of it. Just keep that in mind. And then, of course, they tried to blame all of his corruption and all of this other stuff on the fact that he was an addict. None of that would have mattered for any of you It shouldn't matter for him. There's a reason it's illegal for an addict to go into a gun store and purchase a firearm. There's a reason that it is on the ATF's form. There's a reason that when you run that check, you have to fill that form out. If you don't fill it out correctly, you have committed a crime. If you knowingly lie on that form, you have committed a crime. And if any of you had done what Hunter Biden did, you would have been convicted of the same, but you would have got a more harsh sentence than what he's probably going to get. And every single person listening to this program damn well knows it. But there's still more. We've got more coming up. You're tuned into The Burning Truth.
So damn important. We need you. We need you to overcome the unrelenting opposition of the gun lobby, gun manufacturers, so many politicians when they oppose common sense gun legislation. I used to be when I was no longer the vice president, I became a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. Before that, I taught a constitutional law class, and so I taught the Second Amendment. There's never been a time that says you can own anything you want.
False.
Never. You couldn't own a cannon during the Civil War.
And yes, you could. You can buy them now.
No, I'm serious. Think about it. How many times have you heard this phrase? The blood of liberty. Wash of dough. Give me a break.
Yeah, Thomas Jefferson.
No, I mean it. Seriously. And by the way, if they want to think to take on government if we get out of line, which they're talking again about, well, guess what? They need F-15s. They don't need. They're so dead.
Okay, do the Taliban have F-15s? I'm going to look to Morgan with her vast military expertise. Does the Taliban have F-15s? The answer is no. No. Yeah, she knew that one. So, yeah. What's adorable, and this is the other one too, because another one comes up, is, well, you don't have tanks. And then every infantry guy you know looks at each other and they kind of smirk, but inside they are giggling and laughing hysterically because anybody who says if you have tanks you can just win this thing and nobody can fight a tank, they don't know how to fight a war because, well, reasons. If you're a veteran, you know. If you're not a veteran, you're probably very confused. So listen, that's an old speech, but I just want to remind everybody, he was never a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. He never taught a class there. That is a lie. He claims that you could not own a cannon. You can buy cannons now. I just tagged Joe Biden on the POTUS account just a couple of weeks ago with a massive cannon sale that is happening in Indiana. It actually happened the end of last month, but it's over now. But if you missed your opportunity to buy a cannon at the event that was happening in Indiana, I guess you just have to go online and order a cannon. Until the end of the Civil War, most cannon and artillery pieces in the United States of America were privately held. Before there was an American Navy that was commissioned by the government, guess who owned the warships? Right, the galleons and other naval war vessels. Private citizens. He has been fact-checked on this. It has been debunked a million times, and he still says it. And there isn't anybody in the news media who runs out there, with the exception of a few here and there. Kessler from the Washington Post, the New York Times. Actually, the New York Times did a big debunking piece on a bunch of Biden's lies recently. That's an interesting one. But with the exception of a few and far between examples, the news media in general, every time he says this, they just play the clip and then they just move on. They don't ever sit there and fact check him. Now, if Trump says something, they fact check every little syllable in the way that he speaks. But if Biden says something, they'll just play it and they'll move on to the next thing. Well, the problem is that you have people out there in the audience who don't know the history of the Second Amendment. They don't know that for the entirety of the existence of this nation, you have been legally allowed to walk into your garage and make a gun for your own personal protection, use, whatever. The only limit is you can't transfer it to somebody else without having that stamp on there. That's it. And now they're throwing people in prison for doing just that, even though it has always been your right and it has actually been enshrined by the Supreme Court. I fully expect that case to get appealed. So James Comer The House Oversight Committee chairman, he's a Republican in Kentucky, said that Hunter Biden's guilty verdict on 3 felony counts was a step towards accountability, but then he added that the Justice Department needed to go further. Well, duh, but the Justice Department tried to protect him. Let's not forget that. Hunter Biden's sweetheart plea deal was smoked out after scrutiny by a federal judge. True. Today's verdict is a step towards accountability, but until the Department of Justice investigates everyone involved in the Biden's corrupt influence peddling schemes that generated over $18 million in foreign payments to the Biden family, it will be clear that department officials continue to cover for the big guy, Joe Biden. Guess what's all over Hunter Biden's laptop? References to the big guy. That's all next. And that laptop that they told you wasn't real and was a right-wing conspiracy has now been entered as Item 16 in the evidence in the trial against Hunter Biden that he was just convicted on 3 counts of, which means it will make its way to other court cases. Now, this again was the first and the most minor accusation against any member of the Biden family. And while you can have people out there who are, right-wing influencers or whatever going, this is not a big deal, whatever, listen to me. Some big stuff happened in that trial that set up future trials. And if this trial didn't happen, potentially there could be evidence that was not administered in that case for future trials, which could have been used against them. This is a big step. One, you get convictions for actual crimes that happen. That's huge. But also, you now have that laptop as evidence in a court trial, which means it will be used as evidence in future trials. And the evidence on that laptop, well, it goes all the corruption, the pay-for-play, the money issues. It could potentially have ties to some of the stuff that we've seen with Ukrainian government officials who've accused the Biden family of laundering money. It could have ties there. There's a lot of very interesting things on that laptop that can now actually be used in a further criminal prosecution of the Biden family that would not have been able to be used otherwise. We got more coming up. You're tuned into The Burning Truth.
The Burning Truth with Casey Hendrickson.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you for tuning into The Burning Truth. I am your host, Casey Hendrickson. Did anybody call, by the way? Are they on hold? Oh, God. See, I was having a conversation with my boss about a million things, and I wanted to make sure that Pastor Miles called in, and I didn't have anything set up and ready to go, so I'm glad that he did. Luckily, they actually they got me some real help around here, and John isn't running my board. So, joining us on the line right now is Pastor Lucas Miles. How are you, buddy?
Hey, I'm doing great.
So, I want to play something, because some interesting things are happening, I think, in sports. Can you cue my audio, please, Morgan? So this is Joe Mazzulla. He is the coach of the Boston Celtics. He was asked a question. I want you to listen to this, Pastor, and I want to get your take on this.
Hey, Joe. Vince Goodwill, Yahoo Sports. For the first time since 1975, this is the NBA Finals where you have 2 black head coaches. Given the plight sometimes of black head coaches in the NBA, do you think this is a significant moment? Do you take pride in this? How do you view this, or do you not see it at all?
I wonder how many of those are been Christian coaches.
Love that response. And it's like, hey, how come what are you doing asking me this nonsense? Now, I found that this is actually kind of interesting too, Pastor. 1/3 of Major League Baseball teams have not mentioned LGBTQ pride on X.
Yep. 9
NFL teams are not celebrating Pride Month on social media. Do you think that this has something to do with the backlash that the Dodgers had to endure when they went through what they were going through? Or do you think we're just getting to a point where it's like, listen, it's okay if you're around. It's just that we're not going to go and, lift you up above everybody else?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that are happening. First off, love Coach Joe over at the Celtics. I've been a Celtics fan since I was a kid. I own home and away Larry Bird jerseys, but it's all, his response is almost so beautiful that you can like miss it, because he just kind of mumbles this out, like how many coaches of those were Christians,
Yeah.
And this is the same coach that when asked about the royal family, attending, he goes, I only celebrate one royal family, and that's Mary, Joseph, and Jesus. and I mean, he's awesome, and just so simple, not trying to get in the limelight, just doing his thing, refusing to play into kind of this push to make everything about race baiting and identity politics. And so love that about him. Look, I think the tide's turning in some ways. I think that there are people who are waking up to just really how ridiculous wokeism is, and look, I think they're seeing also that the fans aren't looking for this. Even the thing with the Dodgers, like nobody showed up early for that hardly. They did it. It was televised. They put it through, but there were so many people that I think were just that they didn't want to be part of that. And so I think that there's teams that hopefully are waking up to this. I think there's also players that are Christians that have been outspoken about this. I've been saying here recently that wokeism, when it infiltrates into Christianity, although it can make an impact there, and we certainly have seen that. You and I have talked about so much, wokeism within the church. Ultimately, I believe it's going to be self-limiting. Because if you truly are a Christian, what are you going to do? You're going to dive deeper into Christian texts, specifically the Bible. And when you get into the Bible more, you start realizing that this stuff doesn't line up. And so eventually you have to make a decision. Am I going to follow woke ideology, or am I going to follow the biblical text? And I think there are people that are saying, look, this doesn't really line up. I think I've been hoodwinked along the way, to believe some of this stuff, and they're pushing back on it. So I hope this trend continues.
Yeah, it's been very interesting to watch it, everything that happened with Harrison Butker over there in Kansas City, and just, watching some of the response to it, and just seeing, because this is the thing. I think that most people are probably okay with, pride as long as you're not naked in front of children and, doing really weird, lewd stuff in the street. I think most people are probably, okay, prayed, whatever, have your thing. But I think people are just getting sick and tired of having stuff thrown in their face. And that kind of brings me to the next question, Pastor. It's hard to be a moral person anyway, but does technology make it harder?
Great question. I mean, it's certainly technology is a game changer for a lot of reasons. And so, while we could focus, and I think it's worth a conversation to say, does technology make it harder to be, to live a righteous lifestyle or Christian lifestyle? And the answer is yes, of course. You have at your fingertips. You have the whole of the interweb, right? You've got everything out there, from access to pornography, access to, gambling sites, access to, whatever thing you want to buy, just distraction, period. It doesn't even have to be something that's categorically against God. You're just in what I call the scroll hole. You're just stuck there scrolling, as opposed to being present in your life or with your family or your kids or whatever that is. I think also it's worth pointing out, though, that technology makes it also easier in some ways to share your faith. It makes it easier to evangelize. It makes it easier to reach, nations that previously we couldn't, really get a lot of access to, that now we can find strategic ways to get to them digitally, to be able to share the gospel with them. And so, it's a tool like anything else. It's much like a firearm or something. You can use it for good. You can use it for bad. The tool in itself is not inherently wrong. It's what you do with it, from there. And so I'm for Christians pushing into technology, but, assuming that they've safeguarded their heart and they have some, protections for themselves and accountability along the way.
Well, again, sometimes technology, too, even when you're trying to do the right thing, the algorithm likes to mess with you, right? Maybe you're having a conversation, which is a totally innocent conversation with your kids in the car about something, but because of the subject material that you're discussing, next thing you know, Instagram or TikTok or YouTube or whatever else, they're pushing content to you based on the conversation that you're having, but it's the exact opposite of what you actually want. When you have people come to you as a pastor and ask for assistance or help or anything like that, is there a good chunk of them that are kind of related to these modern technological issues, or does that seem to be kind of tapering off?
I think that, the Gen X and millennials, are pretty savvy with this stuff. I think that parents, I brag about one of my, actually, I've got a couple that's on staff with us that, they'll do just kind of random cell phone checks for their kids, and they'll just say cell phone check, and, they got a bunch of kiddos, and, the older kids got to turn over their phone. So the, parents get to say, What have you been looking at? Where are you spending your time? And I think that that's good to have that level of accountability, that's there. And I think that savvy parents need to be aware. It was, when I remember, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, whatever, it was like the kids were hiding stuff in the app that looks like a calculator, but they were really storing all sorts of, kind of things they probably shouldn't have had access to. That's so much, there's so much more out there now with fake, Instagram accounts and kind of all these secondary accounts where their parents think they only have one account, but they actually have two. So you got to be on top of this stuff with your kids. I think the battle right now is more so with grandparents trying to figure out, one, they're already struggling, just statistically more so with technology, and they're trying to figure out how to be relevant in their grandkids' lives and how to compete with cell phones, when they're there. And I think that grandparents need to recognize they still have an important voice in their kids' life, and that you got to find creative ways to be able to get in front of them, find something they like to do that can get them to set that phone down to really be able to build and speak into them.
And Pastor Miles, of course, we always have you on to promote your church, and you're not the only great church around in the listening audience, but you're one that's near and dear to my heart, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to promote that as well.
Absolutely. First off, I always appreciate that, and there's been a couple times on Sunday where I've said, "Hey, who's come because you heard us first on Casey Hendrickson?" And there's a good portion of hands, man, that will raise of people that found us here first, and we have people that driving in from an hour because they heard us on your show, and it's just awesome to see that. So we're growing every week. It's called Influence Church. There's no I, it's just a capital N at the start. You can go to influencechurch.org to find out more about us. We have campuses. We have a campus here in Granger, one in Kalamazoo. We're just launching. As well as our online campus that you can stream from all over the world. We meet at 10 a.m. Eastern time on Sundays, and would love to have people come out and visit. And, really, we stand for biblical truth, elevating the name of Jesus, and pushing back against this wokeism that we're seeing infiltrate, unfortunately, a lot of Christian denominations.
Man, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Pastor Lucas Miles.
Thanks, Casey.
All right, we got more coming up. You're tuned in to The Burning Truth. And good afternoon. Thank you for tuning into The Burning Truth. I am your host, Casey Hendrickson. So I want to address something that's still a bit of a developing story. So something happened at an LGBTQ event here in South Bend over at The Well, which is a well-known LGBTQ spot. And they do like drag shows for kids and things like that. So there was, we'll call it an assault on Friday, June 7th. Now, we're still missing some details, and I'm working on some of that stuff behind the scenes. But a father and their teenager were attacked, including the dad getting hit over the head with a bell and had their head split open, had to go to the hospital with stitches and everything else. And the teenager was with his father trying to call, for an ambulance, and then getting assaulted himself and having his phone stolen and having them hang up on 911, meaning these activists. And there were people there from the usual suspects. Obviously, you've got some people are linked to Antifa that were there. Of course, the atheist group, Northern Indiana Atheists, were there. And now, allegedly, this dad and the kid were just walking down the sidewalk when they were assaulted. Now, I don't know if words were exchanged. I don't know kind of what kicked that off. We don't seem to have that information at this point in time. But they were certainly assaulted. And some of the individuals who were there are kind of well known as far as activists and things like that in the area. So I'm still waiting to get a little bit more information. Some new video came out today showing the teenager getting assaulted, trying to protect his dad, that sort of stuff. And like I said, it's still developing. I have spoken with the police department. They are investigating, and we'll see exactly what comes out of this thing. But keep an eye on this, and ask yourself, I guess, another thing, too, is why is that not a major story on all of the news channels in the area that 2 people were assaulted, one viciously assaulted with their head split open and needing stitches and spending a night in the hospital after being attacked, and what led to that attack, and why isn't that all over the news at this event, and what is the reason that it's not being covered in that fashion. And I think that would be, well, that would be an appropriate question for you to ask a lot of the news outlets here who are not really covering it. And I would also like to point out that after the event and after the altercation happened, the Northern Indiana Atheists were asked on their page by somebody, did there end up being any issues this year? And the response was, nothing we couldn't handle. The community showed up, the show was sold out, and we heard fantastic reviews from the families who attended. So I guess the nothing we couldn't handle bit would be the hitting somebody over a head and sending them to the hospital and then assaulting their teenage son who was trying to contact emergency medical help for their father. I guess that would be nothing we couldn't handle, according to the Northern Indiana Atheists on their Facebook page. So again, the police are investigating. And as soon as we know anything, we'll of course pass it on to all of you. But yeah, this is something that should probably be covered a heck of a lot more than it is being covered. Would be interesting to see. Other than that, public comments from The Well, who hosted the event, and the Northern Indiana Atheists have not been forthcoming, other than the whole nothing we couldn't handle bit. I don't know what sparked the violence. I don't know what kicked that off. I don't know any of those details, and I haven't seen those details anywhere else either. So as soon as we know more, we will certainly pass them all on to you. Also, 80 new pages of the manifesto have been released for Audrey Hale, the Covenant shooter. Of course, Audrey Hale was transgender, and the authorities at the local as well as the federal level did everything they could to hide this manifesto from the public. And then we started to figure out, I mean, we already knew why, but we really started to figure out why, because this was really all about the shooter's transgenderism, and that was a motivating factor here. But in addition to that, the shooter bought the firearms legally with federal grant money. They used federal grant money in order to go ahead and purchase these firearms, several of them. Now, the family didn't know anything about the firearms. They thought that there was one firearm purchased and then sold again. Again, Louder with Crowder, at Steven Crowder's show, was the exclusive in releasing parts of that transcript. They were the first ones in the country to do it. And then there was a massive investigation in the police department to go ahead and find the leaker and then have the leaker, punished or disciplined in some way. Several people got suspended. They actually never found the leaker. So all of the people who were being suspended were all innocent. And it was none of the individuals that they were targeting within that department. So as we continue to look into this case, it's become pretty clear as the 80 new pages of this thing. And of course, we're going to have to go through the 80 new pages of this manifesto over the next day or two and kind of get the details on it. But it is crystal clear why they did not want this manifesto released, even though they release every other shooter's manifesto, usually within 24 hours. All right, ladies and gentlemen, in 1 hour from now, we're actually going to have a very popular YouTube channel, Ballistic High Speed. The boys from Ballistic High Speed are going to be joining us. They're actually based in Fort Wayne, and they are gun tubers. They do some really good high-speed firearm content. They're going to be in studio. They're going to hang out with us, and it's pretty cool that we got some local boys doing great stuff like that on the internet, and it's finally not another channel in Austin, Texas. So we got more coming up. You're listening to The Burning Truth.
Podcasts by Federated Media.